G'day folks. Well, this is part 2. This is the exciting stuff. This is where all the power is made. I'm going to talk about the turbo and all the setup and what's involved and the workings of it all and the specs on it too. So yeah, kick back and enjoy me waffle on for 5 or so minutes. Okay, well it's a gt42. It's a journal bearing, by the way, not a ball bearing, a journal, and it runs a 75mm compressor wheel and a 82mm turbine wheel with a 1.01 AR turbine housing. The oil for the turbo is fed off from up at the front of the engine, off the where I take the oil pressure gauge from. I've got a T-fitting there, and I've run a braided line all the way back to feed the top at the top there, and there's a restrictor in it to slow the feed down. And from there I've fabricated up a little 1/2-inch copper line, and that clamps onto a 3/8, which is a fuel line, into a little small scavenge pump. So that pump's always pumping as soon as the ignition comes on. She's pumping away there. That's a little cheap one, that one. Little gear driven eBay special. And from there she pumps up to the front. Now, on the Holden V8s, they have a mechanical, and I think Chevys and all that are pretty much the same. From factory they have a mechanical fuel pump off the front of the timing case, and that's where I run the oil back to. I've made a little bracket up and plumb it into there. Now on its way back, because the oil out of the turbo is really hot, because it's not a water-cooled turbo, there's a lot of heat. So to take some edge off that oil on its way back to the engine, I run a small transmission cooler, and would pull a few degrees out of it before going back into the engine, because it's surprising how much oil is actually feeding that turbo. Like, I did a little test there when I first had it all, when I was playing around with it, and I'd imagine about 15 minutes it would recirculate around 5 or 6 litres of oil. So that's a fair little bit of flow there. So putting that little cooler in my eyes, would just help reduce some of the heat. So yeah, that solves the oil issue of returning it back from a rear mount. The front mount has gravity drain, so you need a decent sized pipe from the bottom of the turbo into the sump, and it's all gravity. Well, this has to be pumped back, so you couldn't expect just to run a line from the turbo back to. You'd be blowing smoke and there'd be oil everywhere. She wouldn't work. So that's probably the difference, you know, with a rear mount versus a front mount, is the oil drain back is slightly different. Oh, and of course it's hanging out the back too. I've put a little turbo beanie on it, little bag over it, just to help keep some heat in it. It's made a big difference. The exhaust system is a 1.75 inch 4:1, so the header pipe's off the engine. Now I've header wrapped it all, and it comes out from the collectors 2.5 inch into a 3 inch, and then I've run a muffler before the turbo because the sound of it without a muffler, and even one with a tailpipe muffler, that's the best sound in my opinion, is to put one in between the engine and turbo. It's holding up so far, so no dramas. I've got two bellows, flexible bellows, because I have solid mounted the turbo. I used to have it just swinging off rubber mounts, and it wasn't really successful. It worked, but when I found I was down at the track and under hard braking, the whole system pushed forward and ended up, just done a fair bit of, it bent all my headers actually. It pushed them forward, and yeah, I ended up having to straighten them all back out and fix it. So I've solid mounted the thing, and it's been the best thing ever too. It's nice and solid and rigid, and it doesn't make any noise. And it's a bit of a headache. It was trial and error to start with, but I've got it all down to pat now. So, all right, enough of that. Now the little wastegate I run is a Turbo Smart one. It's only a 38mm, so it's not a big little comp. No, it's a comp gate 40. Sorry, tell a lie. Not an over big gate, but it controls the boost. I haven't had any issues with it. It's funny, I see a lot of other people running, you know, sort of 50mm, 60mm ones. This little fella here works a treat. It's only vented to atmosphere, so I've had no issues with that. And of course I run a boost controller. If the spring in it now is £7, and if I want to go up, I've got a homemade boost controller, and I can go up anywhere from £12 to £15 with it. They say, from what I've heard, you can only sort of double your boost from spring pressure off the wastegate. So yeah, that's all works fine. Now the air intake, when I first hooked it up, I had a filter pod underneath. Oh, it was hopeless, really was. So it just got dirty too quick, and it just never really worked. And I had a guy I did some work for, if he's watching, thanks mate, came up with an idea of, said to me, why don't you run it in the boot? I took him for a spin when I had the small turbo on it, and he suggested that I put it in the boot. Well, I've done exactly that on this next upgrade with this bigger turbo, and what I've gone and done is I've got it mounted in the boot. That's an actual, that's off an F truck, a diesel F truck, that filter. I've sort of made up ends for it and fabbed him up, and I've got a nice 4-inch feed for it, 100mm. It's a bit agricultural, but it works. That's actually sewer pipe, that waste pipe, 100mm with like a flared socket, and I can take this off, clean it, and service it with a bit of flexible pipe, and it's worked a treat. So it's been brilliant. It doesn't get dirty. I've got 4 3-inch holes, I don't know, 5 3-inch holes for the air intakes there, and plus you've got gaps around the boot and whatever, and that's the intake for it. And that was a good little idea, old mate came up with that, so yeah, real happy with it. Now from there, okay, once she goes through the turbo, she's that's 2 3/4 inch charge pipe. And I've got her running, snaking all the way up to the front. Now that acts, a lot of people say front with rear mounts that acts as a bit of an intercooler. Well, I wouldn't say no, because that's a fair length of pipe when you think about it. It runs all the way up, and it's all aluminum, so there's a good chance there that it's going to take a bit of that heat out from the turbo on its way up the front. And before we head up the front, I'll have a quick talk about the tailpipe. That's a 4-inch stainless steel tailpipe, and it's straight out. So that's another beautiful thing with the rear mount, you see, no back pressure. She's straight out the back, and it sounds like a jet when it's going to. And the sound from these are awesome. Anyway, let's head up the front and I'll show you what goes on from there. Alright, I've got him sneaking up from underneath, makes its way up through the fender well there. So, and then I ended up, I've got a 6 by 300 by 4 inch thick intercooler. So I've squeezed one in there, plenty of room actually. So I've got a ton of room between the radiator and the intercooler. It's probably an overkill at the minute, but I think that's really going to come into play when you really up the boost. You know, sort of 12 pound onwards. I think that's starting to really come into play with the intercooler. I could get away with it now with 7 pound. But anyway, from there all the way into the carby. Now I'm running it's only a little cheap eBay blow-off valve. So, and that's just plumbed into the manifold there for suction, and yeah, that's it, just a little atmosphere one. I've got a couple of reference lines off that, and that's it. The signal for the wastegate I run inside the manifold, so it's off the actual brake line down there, and that's where I reference from. I'm guessing that if I say hooked it up say there, I think there's about a pound difference between here and the inside of the manifold once it goes through the carby. And I think rule of thumb too, you're looking at about, well, they say around about £1 to £2. I'm not sure. I'd be guessing at least £1 you'd probably lose if you referenced off over that before the intercooler. So by doing this, I'm actually getting a truer reading actually inside the manifold. So, and from there, the line, well, that's my little, sorry guys, that's a bit tricky here, we go. That's my little homemade boost controller. I haven't got the spring and ball in it at the moment, I've just got it out, but that's an excellent little device, very simple to make. You can find them on, people making them on eBay, on YouTube, and I don't know, $5–10 to make, wasn't much, and it's quite reliable. So it's very handy. I can soon put the ball and spring in it, adjust it. I know roughly where the thread is once I turn it in, roughly within £1 or £2, and if I need to I can adjust the timing fairly quickly. The carby is a really good setup because that actually, more boost, more fuel. So that'll self-regulating really, so that's a great little setup. So yeah, that's the rear mount. Pretty basic really. It's nothing over technical. But the beauty of it is it allows all this room under the front. When I did the engine change, it was really easy. I didn't have to muck around with turbos, pulling them off, and it was excellent, you know, in that sense. Engine bay temps haven't really changed much. I do know that the pipes do get a lot hotter because of the pressure building the turbo, and you know, and the back pressure going through. And that's one thing I have noticed with the turbo. And another thing is those turbos aren't light. That one I got, I think it's nearly around 15–18 kilo. I mean, they're heavy suckers, and I'm just glad I've got it over the back to balance the car up more. So if you had this over the front, you know, as a front mount, I tell you what, she'd be front heavy. She really would. For drag racing, I don't think it really matters. But if you're doing any circuit work, you know, track work, you really want to try and get the weight of the car even. You know, you really want, the ideal is a 60-40, or the ideal world would be a 50-50, but if you can get some weight over the back, that's a good thing. So yeah, that's the turbo, and that's the little setup. Quite basic, but very effective. My next video will be talking about the engine. I think that's a video I can just talk about on that one, because if I go engine, trans and diff, it'll probably drag on. But a good engine one, there's a lot to talk about on that engine. And I want to have a little talk about the differences too with this old engine that I had in it versus this new one here. And then I'll do a trans and diff, and then I'll do a suspension. So a couple of more, 2 or 3 more parts to it, and yeah. So alright guys, that's it for now. See you later.